The notification sliced through the silence of the master bedroom at exactly 2:03 a.m., lighting up the dark ceiling like a cold, artificial moon. It was a message from my wife, Elena, a simple excuse about losing track of time at the office, sent to a husband she assumed was asleep. But I wasn't asleep, and I wasn't at home. I was sitting in my car across the street from the very building she claimed to be inside, watching the lights turn off 3 hours ago. The lie didn't just break the silence. It shattered the reality I thought we lived in. If the quiet unraveling of a perfect life intrigues you, and you want to see what happens when the truth is forced into the light, stay with me. There are stories hidden in the timestamps that we usually ignore, and this one is just beginning. The rain in Chicago didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker, reflecting the neon bleed of the streetlights against the windshield of Lucas's Audi. The engine was off, the interior rapidly cooling to match the February bite outside. But Lucas didn't feel the cold. He felt a specific, hollow type of burning in his chest, the kind that came from swallowing a scream for 3 hours straight. He was parked on Wacker Drive, with a direct line of sight to the glass monolith where his wife, Elena, was a senior partner. The building was a masterpiece of modern architecture. Lucas should know he had consulted on the lobby design, but tonight it looked like a tomb. The lights on the 42nd floor, where Elena's firm occupied the entire spread, had flickered out at 11:15 p.m. It was now 2:02 a.m. Lucas looked down at his phone. The screen was the only source of warmth in the car. He watched the 3 little dots bubbling on the iMessage interface. She was typing. She had been typing for a long time, crafting the narrative, editing the lie until it sounded like the truth. The message arrived with a cheerful ding that sounded obscene in the silence of the car. Elena. Sorry, honey. Didn't notice how late it got. The merger files are a nightmare. Leaving now. Don't wait up. Love you. Lucas stared at the words. He read them once, twice, dissecting the syntax. Didn't notice. Merger. Love you. The trinity of deceit. He looked up at the dark building. It was a physical impossibility for her to be there. The security logs, which he had access to via the building management system he still consulted for, showed her keycard swiping out at 7:30 p.m. She wasn't in the office. She hadn't been for hours. She was somewhere else. Somewhere that required an alibi this elaborate. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. The urge to rage, to type in all caps, to scream "I know" was overwhelming. He wanted to drive to wherever she actually was. The GPS on her car was conveniently disabled, loss of signal, and drag her back to reality. But Lucas was an architect. He understood structure. If he blew up the foundation now, the whole house would come down before he knew what was buried in the basement. He needed her off balance. He needed her to doubt her own script. He didn't type liar. He didn't type "where are you?" He typed 2 letters. A typo? A fragment? A question cut short? Lucas. Is? He hit send. He watched the status change to delivered. Then, almost instantly, read. He could imagine her freezing. She was probably in a hotel room, or maybe the passenger seat of someone else's car, the glow of the phone illuminating a face he used to know better than his own. She would be staring at that word. Is? Is what? Is that true? Is this the end? Is he awake? The 3 dots appeared again, then disappeared, then appeared. She was hesitating. The confidence of her previous text had evaporated. She didn't know how to interpret the glitch in the matrix. Lucas placed the phone face down on the passenger seat. He started the engine. the low hum of the German engineering vibrating through the steering wheel. He took one last look at the dark office building, the empty stage where she claimed to be performing, and put the car into gear. He would be home before her. He would be in bed, breathing evenly, feigning sleep, waiting to feel the cold radiate off her skin when she finally crawled in beside him. The game had started, and she didn't even know the rules had changed. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse, a soft hydraulic hiss that echoed like a gunshot in the quiet apartment. Lucas lay in bed, his breathing measured, his body perfectly still. He had mastered the art of feigning sleep during the first year of their marriage, usually to avoid arguments about his work hours. Now, he used it to study the sound of his wife betraying him. It was 2:48 a.m., 46 minutes since his text. He heard the click of her heels being removed in the foyer, the soft pad of stockinged feet on the hardwood. She was moving slower than usual, hesitating. She wasn't just being quiet, she was listening. She was checking the air pressure of the room, gauging if a storm was waiting for her. When she finally slipped into the bedroom, the scent hit him before she did. It wasn't the sterile, recycled air of a corporate office. It was a mix of cold rain, the leather of a taxi interior, and a faint, sweet trace of cedar, a cologne that wasn't his. The mattress dipped as she sat on the edge. Lucas felt her gaze on his back. She was staring at him, waiting for him to stir, to ask her where she had been. When he didn't move, he felt the tension drain from her body, a physical release of breath that shook the bed frame slightly. She thought she was safe. Morning arrived with the gray, steel light of a Chicago winter. Lucas was up first, standing at the marble island in the kitchen, grinding beans. The noise was abrasive, deliberately loud. Elena walked in 10 minutes later. She looked wrecked. Her silk robe was tied tight at the waist, her hair pulled back in a severe bun that pulled at the skin around her eyes. She hadn't slept. The concealer under her eyes was a shade too light, a hasty patch job over the gilt. "Coffee," Lucas said, sliding a mug across the counter. "You look exhausted, Elle." She took the mug with both hands, using the warmth to steady a slight tremor. "The merger," she said, her voice raspy. "It was brutal. The diligence files were a mess. I didn't leave the conference room until 2. "I know," Lucas said, turning back to the stove to flip an omelet. "I was worried." The silence stretched, thin and brittle. Elena took a sip, her eyes darting to his phone sitting on the counter. "You sent me a text," she said, trying to sound casual, though her voice pitched up at the end. "Last night, just one word." "Is?" Lucas paused, spatula in midair. He didn't turn around immediately. He let the seconds tick by, letting her heart rate spike. Then he chuckled, a low, warm sound that felt like ash in his mouth. "Did I?" He turned, leaning against the counter with a confused smile. "I must have been half asleep. I think I was trying to type, 'Is everything okay?' Or maybe, 'Is it done yet?' Honestly, I passed out with the phone in my hand. Did it wake you?" Elena's shoulders dropped 2 inches. The relief on her face was so naked, so pathetic, that Lucas almost felt pity. She laughed, a breathless, jagged sound. No, I was confused. I thought maybe something was wrong here." "Everything is fine here," Lucas lied, his eyes locking onto hers. He watched her pupils dilate. "Just missing my wife. It's hard sleeping in that big bed alone." Elena smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She walked around the island and hugged him, burying her face in his chest. Lucas stood rigid for a fraction of a second before wrapping his arms around her. He could smell the cedar again, faint but stubborn, clinging to her hair. "I'm going to take a shower," she mumbled into his shirt. "Wash the office off." "Go ahead," Lucas whispered, kissing the top of her head. "Take your time." As she pulled away and walked toward the bathroom, Lucas's eyes fell to the pocket of her robe. The outline of her phone was visible, weighing down the silk. She never took it to the bathroom before. Now, it was an appendage she couldn't sever. He waited until the water started running. Then he picked up his own phone and opened the shared cloud account. He watched the sync icon spin. She had deleted the text thread from last night, scrubbing the record of his question and her lie. But she had forgotten that the cloud didn't forget as quickly as she did. The game wasn't just about what she was hiding. It was about how sloppy she was becoming. The study was the only room in the penthouse that Lucas had designed entirely for himself. It was soundproofed, lined with dark walnut shelves, and smelled faintly of old paper and drafting graphite. It was his sanctuary, a place where structure and logic ruled. But as he sat before the glow of his dual monitors, the logic of his life was dissolving into pixels and timestamps. Elena had gone to work. Actually, to work this time, he checked, leaving her personal iPad on the bedside table. It was a careless mistake, or perhaps a sign of arrogance. She assumed that because she had her phone, she was safe. She forgot that their digital lives were inextricably linked through the family cloud, a feature they had set up years ago to share grocery lists and vacation photos. Lucas didn't need to be a hacker. He just needed to be a husband who paid attention. He opened the significant locations history on the iPad. The device had been syncing with her phone in the background, logging frequent stops to improve map suggestions. It was a feature most people ignored, a silent observer in the pocket. He saw the office, 200 South Wacker Drive, 42 visits in the last month. Normal. He saw their home, 110 Superior Street. Normal. Then he saw the anomaly. 400 North Lake Shore Drive, 18 visits in the last 6 weeks. Average duration, 3.5 hours. Most recent visit, yesterday, 8:45 p.m. to 1:55 a.m. Lucas stared at the address. It wasn't a hotel. It wasn't a restaurant. It was a residential high-rise, one of the few buildings in the city that rivaled their own for exclusivity. The address felt familiar, scratching at the back of his mind like a forgotten name. He opened a separate window and typed the address into the county property tax database. It was a public record, accessible to anyone who knew where to look. The search bar spun for a second before spitting out the owner's name. Owner of record, Julian V. Hallowell. The air in the study seemed to vanish. Lucas sat back in his chair, the leather creaking loudly in the silence. Julian. Julian was the man who had toasted at their wedding. Julian was the one who had introduced Lucas to the board of the architectural firm he now helped run. Julian was the godfather to the children they hadn't had yet. The betrayal didn't just sting, it metastasized. It wasn't just sex. If it was a stranger at a bar, Lucas could almost understand the biological impulse, the momentary lapse of judgment. But this was sustained. This was intimate. 18 visits. That meant 18 dinners, 18 conversations, 18 times they had laughed at Lucas's expense while lying in Julian's sheets. Lucas looked back at the screen. He pulled up the calendar. Every time Elena had marked merger meeting or late client dinner, it aligned perfectly with a visit to Julian's penthouse. The Vanderbilt merger wasn't a business deal. It was a code. He felt a vibration on his wrist. His smartwatch lit up. Notification. Message from Julian Hallowell. Lucas looked at the watch face. The preview text scrolled across the small screen. Julian, hey man, are we still on for dinner Friday? Elena mentioned she's been swamped. Hope she's holding up. A surge of nausea hit Lucas, violent and sudden. The audacity was breathtaking. Julian was checking the temperature, fishing to see if the is text had caused any ripples, all while pretending to be the concerned friend. Lucas didn't reply. He took a screenshot of the location history on the iPad, then a screenshot of the tax record. He saved them to a hidden encrypted folder on his private server, labeling the file simply, The Foundation. He stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city looked different now. It wasn't a landscape of opportunities. It was a grid of lies. He could see Julian's building from here, a jagged spire piercing the gray sky. He wasn't going to cancel dinner. He was going to go. He was going to sit across from them, break bread, and watch them lie. He wouldn't burn the house down yet. He would wait until everyone was inside and lock the doors. The restaurant was a theater of shadows and crystal, the kind of place where the silence was as expensive as the wine. Lucas sat at the head of the small round table, swirling the Pinot Noir in his glass. To his right sat Elena, looking radiant in a backless emerald dress that he knew Julian liked. To his left sat Julian, wearing a suit Lucas had helped him pick out 3 months ago. The truffle risotto is exceptional tonight, Julian said, his voice carrying that familiar, charismatic baritone that commanded boardrooms. He smiled at Elena, then at Lucas, the picture of the benevolent best friend. You two need to try it. I'm not very hungry, Elena said, her fingers tightening around the stem of her water glass. She had been jumpy all evening, her eyes darting between the two men like a trapped bird. Lucas sliced his steak with surgical precision. The knife scraped against the porcelain, a harsh sound that made Elena flinch. You should eat, Elle. You've been working so hard on that Vanderbilt merger. You need your strength. He saw Julian's smile falter for a microsecond. It was a tiny twitch at the corner of his mouth, quickly smoothed over by a sip of wine. Right, the merger, Julian said, nodding too enthusiastically. Elena was telling me about the hours. Sounds brutal, Lucas. You're a saint for putting up with the late nights. Most husbands would be jealous. Jealous? Lucas repeated the word, tasting it. He looked directly at Julian. Why would I be jealous? It's not like she's with another man, Julian. She's at the office. I trust the office. The air at the table grew heavy. The background hum of the restaurant seemed to fade. Elena reached for her wine, draining half the glass in one go. Of course, Julian laughed, though the sound was hollow. I just meant the time commitment. It takes a toll on a marriage. It does, Lucas agreed. He set his knife down and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. But that's the thing about marriage, isn't it? It's about knowing someone so well that they can't hide anything. Even when they think they're being clever. Even when they think they're invisible. Elena choked slightly on her wine. Julian reached out instinctively to pat her back, his hand lingering on her bare shoulder for a second too long before he remembered where he was. He pulled his hand back, as if burned. Lucas watched the interaction with cold detachment. He saw the way their knees were angled toward each other under the table. He saw the shared look of panic they exchanged when he wasn't supposed to be looking. Actually, Lucas said, signaling the sommelier for another bottle. I wanted to propose a toast. He raised his glass. Julian and Elena followed suit, their movements stiff and mechanical. To friendship, Lucas began, locking eyes with Julian. To the people who stand by us at the altar. He shifted his gaze to Elena. And to the truth, because eventually, everything else rots away. Only the truth remains. To the truth, Julian murmured, his voice barely a whisper. To the truth, Elena echoed, her hand trembling so badly that a drop of red wine spilled over the rim of her glass, staining the white tablecloth like a drop of fresh blood. Lucas drank deeply, savoring the vintage. He watched Elena stare at the stain, unable to look away. She knew. Somewhere deep down, beneath the denial and the arrogance, she was beginning to realize that the "is" wasn't a typo. It was an indictment. So, Julian, Lucas said, setting his glass down with a definitive clink. How is the new place on Lakeshore Drive? I hear the view from the penthouse is breathtaking at 2 a.m. The silence that followed was absolute. Julian froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Elena stopped breathing. Lucas smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile. I'd love to see it sometime. Maybe we can all go together. The drive home was a vacuum of silence, the kind that sucked the air out of the cabin until your ears popped. Lucas drove with his usual steady hands, but the tension radiating from the passenger seat was palpable. Elena was staring out the window, her reflection ghosting against the passing city lights, her jaw set in a hard, trembling line. The moment the front door of the penthouse clicked shut, the explosion happened. It wasn't loud, but it was violent in its intensity. What the hell was that, Lucas? Elena turned on him, tossing her clutch onto the entry console with a clatter that echoed through the hallway. You embarrassed me. You embarrassed Julian. What is going on with you? Lucas hung his keys up, taking a beat to center himself. I was just making conversation, Elena. We were having dinner. You weren't making conversation. You were interrogating us, she snapped, walking into the living room and pacing the length of the rug. She spun around, her eyes welling with sudden, weaponized tears. You've been acting insane since that text. Is? What does that even mean? You're checking up on me? You're stalking my location? I didn't say I was stalking you, Lucas said calmly, though his pulse was hammering. You didn't have to. It's in your tone. It's in the way you look at me. Her voice broke, a perfect crack of vulnerability. She sank onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. God, Lucas, do you have any idea how lonely I've been? You're always at the firm. You're always in your head. I come home to a ghost. And now, when I'm drowning in work, trying to keep my career afloat, you decide to play these paranoid mind games? Lucas stood frozen near the archway. The accusation hit a soft target. He did work late. He was often distant, lost in blueprints and structural loads. For a terrifying second, the certainty of the last 24 hours wavered. Was he the villain here? Was her infidelity, if it even was that, a symptom of his own neglect? The narrative she was spinning was seductive because it contained a grain of truth. I didn't realize you felt that way, Lucas said quietly, his resolve chipping. I thought we were building something. We were, she sobbed, looking up at him, mascara smudged artfully beneath her eyes. But I feel like I'm the only one living in this house sometimes. Julian is just a friend who listens. That's it. And you made it feel dirty tonight. She stood up, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand, looking fragile and defeated. I'm going to bed. I can't do this tonight. She walked past him, leaving her heavy wool trench coat draped over the armchair, a careless discard in her dramatic exit. Lucas stood alone in the living room, the echo of her sobbing still hanging in the air, He felt a heavy stone of guilt in his stomach. Maybe he had pushed too hard. Maybe he was reading too much into the coordinates. He walked over to the armchair to hang up her coat. It was a reflex, a habit of order that he couldn't shake. He picked up the heavy wool fabric, smoothing the collar. As he did, his hand brushed against the deep side pocket. There was a stiff piece of paper inside. He shouldn't look. If he looked, he was the paranoid husband she accused him of being. If he looked, he was invading her privacy. He reached in and pulled it out. It was a thermal receipt, crinkled and faded. It wasn't from a restaurant or a store. It was a valet parking stub from the Drake Hotel. Lucas stared at the date and time. Tuesday, November 14th. In, 1:15 p.m. Out, 4:45 p.m. Tuesday, November 14th. That was the day of her grandmother's funeral in Wisconsin. She had called him from the road, crying, saying she couldn't bear to drive back yet. That she was staying at her parents' house one more night to comfort her mother. She hadn't been in Wisconsin. She had been at the Drake Hotel in downtown Chicago, 3 blocks from Julian's office, for 3.5 hours in the middle of the afternoon. The guilt in Lucas's stomach evaporated, replaced instantly by a cold, crystalline clarity. The loneliness was a script. The tears were a performance. She wasn't a victim of his neglect. She was a sociopath covering her tracks. He folded the receipt carefully and slipped it into his own pocket. He turned off the living room lights, plunging the room into darkness, and walked toward the bedroom where his wife was pretending to sleep. The grand hall of the Art Institute was a cavern of marble and noise, reverberating with the polite roar of Chicago's elite. It was the annual Architects Guild Gala, a night where net worth was measured in tuxedo labels and the structural integrity of social ladders was tested. Lucas stood near a fluted column, a glass of champagne warming in his hand. He watched his wife work the room. Elena was magnificent, a vision in silver silk that caught the light of the chandeliers with every movement. She was laughing at a joke made by the mayor, her head thrown back, her hand resting lightly on the arm of a potential client. To the room, she was the devoted wife of a rising partner, the supportive force behind his success. To Lucas, she was a stranger wearing a familiar face. Since the night of the receipt discovery, a strange truce had settled over the penthouse. Elena believed she had won. She thought her outburst about loneliness had shamed Lucas into silence. She had become affectionate again, touching his arm, asking about his day, playing the role of the reconnecting spouse. Lucas had let her. He had become a mirror, reflecting exactly what she wanted to see, while his mind catalogued every inconsistency. "She looks happy tonight," a voice said beside him. Lucas didn't need to turn to recognize the cadence. It was Julian. Of course, Julian was here. He was on the board. "She does," Lucas replied, taking a sip of the champagne. It tasted acidic. "She loves the attention. She thrives on it." "You're a lucky man, Lucas," Julian said, clinking his glass against Lucas's. "Not many women can balance the corporate world and the domestic demands with such grace." "Grace," Lucas repeated. "That's one word for it." He turned to face Julian, his expression pleasant, unreadable. "I think capability is better. She's capable of things I never imagined." Julian's smile tightened at the edges, but before he could respond, the flashbulbs erupted near the entrance. The keynote was starting. The crowd began to migrate toward the auditorium. "I need to check my coat," Lucas lied smoothly. "I forgot my phone. Save me a seat next to her?" He didn't wait for an answer. He moved against the current of the crowd, slipping into the quieter, dimly lit corridor that led to the cloakroom and the private lounges. He didn't have his phone in his coat. It was in his pocket. He just needed a moment away from the suffocating perfume of betrayal. As he turned the corner near the velvet-roped VIP lounge, he heard a voice. It was hushed, urgent, but unmistakable. "Stop it. Not here." Lucas froze. He stepped into the shadow of a heavy velvet curtain. "I can't wait anymore, Elle. The way he looked at me at dinner. He suspects something." It was Julian's voice. He must have slipped away the moment Lucas left. "He suspects nothing," Elena's voice hissed back. "He's guilty. I turned it around on him. He thinks he's been neglecting me. I have him exactly where I want him. It's risky. We're pushing our luck." "Just until New Year's," Elena said, her voice dropping to a steely whisper. "I need the bonus from the firm before I file. If I leave now, it gets messy with the assets. I need to secure the apartment in my name first. Just let me get through the holidays, play the happy wife for Christmas, and then I'm done. I promise." Lucas stood perfectly still. The blood in his veins felt like ice water. He had thought he was fighting to save the marriage, or perhaps just to understand the truth. He hadn't realized he was already a line item in a liquidation strategy. She wasn't just cheating. She was calculating his destruction. "Okay," Julian sighed. "New Year's, but then we tell him." "We won't have to tell him," Elena said, her voice softening, sounding almost like the woman Lucas had married. "By then, he'll be the one begging me to stay, and I'll be the one walking away with everything." Lucas didn't stay to hear the rest. He turned and walked silently back toward the gala, his footsteps swallowed by the plush carpet. He adjusted his cufflinks, straightened his tie, and stepped back into the light. He wasn't going to wait for New Year's. The door to the penthouse clicked shut, locking out the world, but the silence inside was heavier than the steel frame of the building. Elena kicked off her heels immediately, letting out a sigh that was meant to signal the end of a long, dutiful night. She walked toward the kitchen, her silver dress rustling like dry leaves. "I'm going to make tea," she called out, her voice light, practiced. "Do you want some? My throat is parched from all that talking." Lucas didn't answer. He didn't move toward the bedroom to loosen his tie. He didn't turn on the television to check the late-night news. He walked to the center of the living room and stood there, his hands clasped behind his back, watching her silhouette move in the dim light of the kitchen hood. "Elena," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had a density that stopped her hand halfway to the kettle. She turned, a polite, tired smile plastered on her face. "Yes?" "You asked me a week ago what I meant by that text," Lucas said. The one word, "is." Elena's smile faltered, just a fraction. "Lucas, are we back to this? I thought we moved past the paranoia." "I never answered you," he continued, ignoring her deflection. He took a step forward into the pool of light cast by the floor lamp. "I was parked on Wacker Drive at 2 a.m. that night. I was watching your building. The lights on the 42nd floor had been out for 3 hours. Elena froze. The kettle in her hand clattered onto the counter, a sharp, metallic ring that vibrated through the room. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin the color of the marble behind her. You were there?" she whispered. "I was there," Lucas said, his voice terrifyingly even. "And I was asking myself a question. Is she really doing this? Is she really thinking I'm this blind? Is she worth the scene I'm about to make?" He reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out the crumpled valet receipt from the Drake Hotel. He placed it gently on the coffee table between them. "I found this in your coat," he said. "The day of your grandmother's funeral. You weren't grieving in Wisconsin, Elena. You were at the Drake. With him." Elena stared at the receipt. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The gaslighting script, the tears about loneliness, the accusations of neglect, it all evaporated under the harsh light of evidence. She looked small, stripped of her armor. "Lucas, wait," she stammered, her hands coming up in a defensive posture. It's complicated. Julian and we didn't mean for it to happen. It just—" "Stop," Lucas cut her off. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. "Don't insult me with the accident narrative. I heard you tonight, outside the VIP lounge." This was the blow that broke her. Her knees actually gave way, and she sank onto the arm of the sofa, clutching her chest as if she couldn't breathe. "I heard the plan," Lucas said, looking down at her with a look of profound disappointment. "Wait until New Year's. Secure the bonus, secure the apartment, then leave the husband." He walked over to the window, looking out at the city view that she wanted so desperately to keep. "You treated our marriage like a distressed asset, Elena. You managed the decline. You mitigated the risk." He turned back to her. "But you forgot one thing. You don't get to liquidate the company while the CEO is still watching the books." "Lucas, please." She began to sob, but the tears were different this time. They were ugly, terrified tears. "I was scared. I didn't know how to tell you. I still love you, in a way, I just—" "Is?" Lucas asked again, closing the loop. He looked at his wife, a woman he had built a life with, a woman plotting to steal his future while sleeping in his bed. "Is it over?" he answered himself. "Yes, it is." He walked past her, toward the guest room. He didn't look back at the sobbing figure in the silver dress. The ghost in the house wasn't him anymore. It was her. The movers were efficient. They didn't ask questions. They simply wrapped the memories in bubble wrap and sealed them in brown cardboard boxes marked "Master Bedroom" or "Fragile," treating the debris of a 10-year marriage with the same indifference as they would a corporate relocation. Lucas stood in the center of the living room, the winter sun casting long, pale rectangles across the hardwood floor. The rug where Elena had accused him of neglect was gone. The coffee table where he had placed the receipt was gone. The penthouse wasn't a home anymore. It was just asset number 4 in the divorce filing, listed on the market as of this morning. Elena had left 2 days after the confrontation. She hadn't fought for the apartment. The shame, or perhaps the legal counsel of her attorney, had silenced her. She had moved into a serviced apartment downtown, presumably funded by the bonus she had been so desperate to secure. The front door was open, propped by a rubber wedge. The foreman of the moving crew walked in, holding a clipboard. "That's the last of it, Mr. Thorne," the man said, offering a pen. "Just need a signature for the release." Lucas signed. The scratch of the pen on paper was the only sound in the empty room. "Thanks. Lock the freight elevator on your way down." "Will do. Good luck." The door clicked shut. The silence that followed wasn't heavy like it had been that night in the car. It was expansive, echoing. It was the sound of a clean slate. Lucas walked to the kitchen island. There was one item left on the counter, a key fob, her set. She had left it there without a note, a final surrender of access. He picked it up, weighing it in his hand. It felt light, insignificant. He thought about the plan she had made with Julian, the New Year's exit, the calculated blindside. They had wanted to control the narrative, to write the ending where Lucas was the oblivious victim left behind. Instead, Lucas had edited the script. He had accelerated the timeline. He pulled his phone from his pocket. The screen was cracked slightly in the corner. He had dropped it the day he met with his lawyers, a small casualty of the process. He opened his contacts. Elena. The name sat there, attached to a number he had dialed thousands of times. He scrolled up to the message thread. It was still there, frozen in time. Elena. Sorry, honey. Didn't notice how late it got. Lucas. Is? He had never sent another text after that. There had been no screaming matches over SMS, no begging, no bargaining. He had let that incomplete sentence hang there as the final epitaph of their relationship. Is it painful? Yes. The ache in his chest was a dull, constant throb, the phantom pain of an amputated limb. Is it necessary? Absolutely. The trust wasn't just broken. The foundation had been deemed structurally unsound. Is it over? Lucas tapped the edit button. He selected the contact card. He didn't block her. Blocking implied he was still affected, still trying to keep her out. He simply hit delete contact. Are you sure you want to delete this contact? He pressed. Yes. The name vanished. The number became just a string of digits, anonymous and cold. Lucas put the phone back in his pocket. He picked up the key fob and dropped it into the trash chute in the hallway. He didn't look back at the view of the city, the view she had loved, the view that looked out toward Julian's building. He didn't need to see it anymore. He walked out of the penthouse, the sound of his footsteps firm and steady on the marble. He pressed the button for the lobby. The elevator arrived with a cheerful chime, opening its doors to a future that was empty, quiet, and entirely his own.